Hi, everyone. Welcome to this free talk NYFF kickoff. I'm Devika Girish. I'm the assistant editor of Film Comment, and I'm one of the programmers of the talk section of the festival.
And I'm Maddie Whittle. I am the programming assistant year-round at Film at Lincoln Center, and with Devika, the co-programmer of the talk section.
And we're so grateful and so excited that so many of you have joined us to kick off the festival through this preview. The festival is only 2 days or whatever units of time you're using during the pandemic away. So, we're excited to share a lot of things about how the festival came together and what to look forward to. Maddie will say a little more about that in a second. I just want to start off with a few announcements. So first of all, this is the first of a lot of talks that are, that we're going to announce soon, and we'll say more about that in a bit. All these talks are presented by HBO, so a tip of the hat to HBO. There will also be podcasts occurring throughout the festival, so you can plug into the festival that way, and there's going to be more details about that announced shortly. We also encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter, our social media channels, to ensure that you don't miss out on any of the exciting updates and festival announcement that we're going to basically be churning out constantly for the next 3 weeks. And last but not the least, thank you so much to the Film at Lincoln Center board, patrons, members, and dedicated moviegoers like you who make our work possible throughout the year. So a big thank you. Over to you, Maddie.
Thank you very much. We are really excited to be hosting this event, which we see as sort of a way of kicking off the talks program for this year's NYFF. We've been hard at work for the last few months, organizing talks around all of the sections of the festival, trying to bring filmmakers and other knowledgeable people into conversation with one another about some of the themes that we've sort of drawn out of the lineups of films that will be available. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the talk, but this panel sort of serves as an introduction to that format. If you haven't joined us for any of our virtual talks this summer, they are all conducted sort of like this via Zoom and live streamed. And there'll be an announcement coming tomorrow about the preliminary talks lineup with some really exciting highlights that you'll be able to check out. Those are all free and again presented by HBO, and we're really excited to get that going. But in the meantime, we're very happy to be joined by most of the selection committee of this year's New York Film Festival. And we're going to introduce them in just a minute and give them a chance to talk about their sort of initial thoughts about the sections that they've been working on this year. And then we'll sort of get into a conversation, ask them some more probing questions. And towards the end of the session, there will be time for audience questions. So Jordan will be in the chat communicating via text, so you can follow along with him. And if you have questions that you'd like to submit, you can do so via the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window. So you can do that. You can submit questions throughout the conversation, and then in the last 10 or so minutes, we will present those questions to the programming team. So I think, have I touched on everything, Devika?
I think so. I think maybe we bring in the members of our selection committee now, but we'll actually start off by bringing in Dennis Lim and Eugene Hernandez, who've taken the helm of the festival this year, and they can talk a little bit about the festival's new structure and team, and how they started working on the festival even before the pandemic began, with a lot of new ideas.
Hi, Dennis and Eugene.
Howdy. How's it going?
So if you'd like to just briefly introduce yourselves and maybe say a few words about your new roles this year.
I'll start off. I'm Eugene Hernandez. I'm Deputy Executive Director at Film at Lincoln Center, where I've been working for about 10 years. This year, taking on this new role as a leader of the festival. I have a long history with the festival, so it's really meaningful on a personal level and a professional level to have this opportunity to be in this seat. It's just a festival that has, from the very first time I attended on opening night in 1994, has shaped so much of my understanding and knowledge and passion for cinema. So I'm looking forward to hearing Maddie and Devika. I'm looking forward to your questions, but I'm also especially looking forward to some of the questions from our audience. I'm just scrolling through and I see a bunch of familiar names, so it's really good to have the opportunity to talk with you all. Happy to be here. Hi, Dennis.
Hey. I guess I'll go next. So I'm Dennis Lim, and I've been the director of programming at Film at Lincoln Center since 2013. And yeah, as you mentioned, Eugene and I took over these roles earlier this year. I've had the privilege of serving on the New York Film Festival selection committees for 10 years before I took on this role. I worked with Richard Pena for 3 years and then with Kent Jones for 7 years. And this year had the opportunity to chair the selection committees and also to, in collaboration with Eugene, just rethink the structure of the festival. So, it was really a process of two things that we wanted to achieve. One was to kind of streamline it and clarify the identity of this event, which obviously has such a strong identity and legacy going back 58 years. And also to bring in some outside voices and to highlight some of the internal programmers, the year-round programmers, to build this robust team of programmers and advisors as the decision makers for the festivals, for who make the calls on what films we show and how we show them. And of course, both of you, Devika and Maddie, are crucial to this process as the programmers of our talk section, which we are not going to talk about too much right now since we haven't announced it, but
the first rule of free talk: don't talk about any of the free talk.
But yeah, anyway, I know there's lots of great stuff planned.
And before we kind of go into the main slate in more detail, could you talk a little more about how exactly the structure of the festival and the sections have changed? Just a brief overview before we go into the granularities.
Sure. Eugene can jump in at any point if I'm missing anything. What we wanted to do was kind of reduce the number of sections. The festival has sort of grown in recent years, I would say in the last 8 years or so, especially when Film at Lincoln Center added its new additional screens. It was a festival that took place on 4 screens. We wanted to just sort of streamline these into fewer sections that were clearly defined. The main slate had to stay. This is the heart of the festival. This is the core of the festival. It is it's this collective statement, collective response by the selection committee to the year in cinema, a collective statement on what matters right now. So that would have to stay, but we wanted to create a kind of, to really put together a more complete picture of contemporary cinema. So the next thing we did was to create a section called Currents. There's always been room in the festival programming since the early days for, you can call it experimental film, you can call it, just sort of less classifiable work, more formally challenging work, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there was a long-running program called Views in the Avant-Garde, and then there was another one called Projections that Aily Nash and I worked on for 6 or 7 years. Currents is a continuation of that strain of programming, and it's like the biggest iteration that has yet existed in the festival. It's a section that is about the same size as the main slate, and we think that it's a section that complements the main slate nicely. We also wanted to have a section called Spotlight, which, as the name suggests, is a showcase for high-profile, high-impact films. We can talk a little bit more about what this year's selections are, and Eugene and I worked on that together. And I should say I chaired the main slate and the current selection committees. And then we have we've always had room for older films in the festival in our revival section. And it was important this year for us to connect the revivals to the rest of the program. And I think the programmers this year, Florence Almozini and Dan Sullivan, have done a wonderful job of that. And lastly, and very important, the talk section, which the two of you have been hard at work on the last few weeks, which will, I think, be especially important this year, in the absence of physical gatherings outside of drive-ins. I think the idea of the talk section as the virtual meeting place, as the opportunity to create context and conversations for the festival. So we're not really changing the mission, the idea, the basic idea of this festival, which is to survey the year in cinema and to take a stand on what we believe in. But we thought it would be helpful to create a more legible program structure for people who might be new to us, and also for people who might be, who have been following us over the years. I think one real flaw of the festival in recent years is how certain films would tend to fall by the wayside just because there were so many sections and so many films in them. Eugene, you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, Dennis, I was thinking about there was a kind of elegance and a simplicity to the festival. If you look at that kind of list of films in the festival in the early days, before there was a main slate, it was just the festival, right? There was just a strong section of films, and over the years, I think, understandably, as the organization grew, as the organization added more theaters, it was natural to want to explore and add different sections. But I think the conversations that you and I had at the beginning of our process of diving in, this is before pandemic, and really back in January, February, the conversations you and I had as we were embarking on these roles, and then the conversations we had with folks like Maddie and Devika, people on our staff and people in the office about just taking feedback about how, and from people out in the world, audience, filmmakers, others. I think it just made sense to just kind of clarify and simplify and just kind of refresh the festival and the way it's organized. And it really, I think there's a kind of elegance now to this new structure that really makes a lot of sense. And I hope it does to the audience as well. And I think that's, today we'll talk more about some of the films in each section, but I think just hearing you talk about it, I think it just really reminds me that these are really the goals we set out before the pandemic. And then a whole bunch of things happened during and throughout the summer of the pandemic that challenged some of those intentions. But I think we ended up where we kind of hoped, you know what I mean? And that's refreshing and reassuring that we got there.
Yeah, I hope it also encourages people to just not stick to one section, but to look for sort of connections across the program, because we think there are some interesting ones.
We had these conversations that Maddie and Devika will recall with our full staff, and we were talking about festival. We had this day where everybody was offering different ideas and suggestions, and one of the greatest takeaways I heard that day was it would be great if we could make the festival shorter. Unfortunately, this year we actually went in the opposite direction. We made it a bit longer, but that's something that I think we'll talk about in a little while as we talk about how we engage with an audience and try to get as many films in front of people. It deserves underscoring what Dennis just said. Don't just focus on the main slate. There's just so much to explore and discover in every area of the festival, and I really hope anybody who's watching now will take the opportunity to just try something different or challenge themselves to see something that maybe they've never heard of or wouldn't have otherwise.
Not to focus on the main slate. Sorry, Maddie, did you? I was going to focus on the main slate, but
you can explore these things from the comfort of your own home, thanks to our new virtual cinema, which we're all very excited about.
And now to the main slate, which I've heard Dennis and Eugene describe as the films that matter, and I'm very curious to hear from the other people who played a role in selecting the main slate, Florence Almozini and Rachel Rosen. If you could introduce yourselves, and if all of you could give us some insight into what it means for a film to matter this year.
And we should, before you do, we should mention that one member of the main Slate selection committee couldn't be with us today. Cam Collins, K. Austin Collins, as you might know him, who's just recently taken on a post as a film critic at the Rolling Stone. He unfortunately wasn't able to join us today, but he's also on the main Slate selection committee. So Florence and Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Maddie, and hi, everyone. My name is Florence Almozini. So I've been a programmer at Film at Lincoln Center since 2014. I've been working on the New York Film Festival for the last few years, and among other things, because I also work all year round on programming, including First Run, Rendezvous with French Cinema, New Director, New Films. So I have some experience in programming, one could say. Working on Main Slate this year was really exciting. First of all, because it was a new committee, new section. Obviously, we didn't plan for the pandemic, but in a way, I have to say that because it changed everything, it was also very challenging, but very creative in terms of not just depending on movies that would play in Cannes and just like looking beyond. It was, yes, certainly challenging, but I think the result is really interesting. And we have some big names, like familiar names, in terms of director, actors, studios we work with, but there's also a lot of movies that are really, really worth discovering and maybe would have not find the same place in Main Slate. Maybe some would have had to wait for new director, new films. Sometimes or they wouldn't really stand out in a bigger section. So it was, I think overall, I'm really pleased with the selection the committee has put together.
I'm Rachel Rosen. I'm on the selection committee for the first time this year, so that was really exciting for me. Briefly, my first ever festival job was as the director's liaison at the New York Film Festival, which was a job I had for 3 years. So for better or for worse, the New York Film Festival is responsible for my career as a film programmer. And I went on to work at the San Francisco Film Festival for 20 festivals, 10 as director of programming. I broke that up in the middle with some work at Film Independent in Los Angeles. And it was really exciting for me to be part of this committee for a lot of different reasons. One is, I mean, I had such a wonderful team of programmers I worked with in San Francisco, but after a certain amount of time, you get into a shorthand that you use when talking about film. So it was kind of exciting and intimidating to be a part of a group and have these discussions about movies with people with whom I didn't have any shorthand, even though I've known some of them for quite some time and talked about film. And just that idea of being able to talk about cinema and the way that points to the world was really an incredible sort of thing to have each week. So I really feel like I'm looking forward to audiences getting that from the festival coming up, because being able to watch these movies and engage with them, both in the ways they relate to the real world and just as pure cinema and the way they relate to each other, it was really thrilling for me. So that was my experience.
Thank you all. I think Devika, shall we introduce the other sections now?
Yeah, let's bring everyone on, and we will go into the specific movies, by the way, but we want you to meet, the people who've been choosing them. So next up are, drum roll, pick Maddie.
Oh, the next section that we will talk about is the current section, which was programmed by Dennis, Florence, Tyler Wilson, and Aily Nash. So Tyler and Aily, if you want to turn your cameras on.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks.
Hi.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Tyler, go ahead.
My name's Tyler Wilson. I'm a year-round assistant programmer from FLC and one of the members of the current selection committee and head programmer of shorts with Aily this year on Currents. For the past few years, I've worked on our short section of the festival and also programmed shorts in our New Directors, New Films Festival for the past few years as well.
I'm Aily Nash, and I've been a programmer with the festival since 2014. As Dennis mentioned, we co-programmed the projection section for 6 or 7 editions, and I'm now working with Tyler, Dennis, and Florence on Currents. Yeah, should we say more about our working process, or?
Yeah, just a little bit, about your experience.
Maybe an overview of the Currents section and how it's structured and sort of the shorts features breakdown.
Yeah, so Dennis, Florence, Tyler, and I do the features together, the 4 of us. And this year, previously, the projection section only had about 6 features, and now it's very exciting. I think we have 14 features, which is, we're really able to see a bigger swath of the kind of filmmaking that's, really should be part of the festival that we didn't really quite have space for previously. And the shorts also used to be broken up into projections and the main slate, and now we have all the shorts living within Currents, which Tyler and I programmed together, and we're also now not really thinking about narrative shorts, experimental shorts, doc shorts as separate entities, but really looking at them all together, and they're all kind of living together within 8 shorts programs. And so, it was really exciting to work with Tyler and to kind of reimagine how we approach shorts this year.
Thanks.
Tyler, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe add to the shorts. This year, we were able to present a pretty hefty number of short films. I think we're showing 45 in total. And I'm sure those of you who have looked through the lineup already, a few of the directors may stand out to anyone familiar with projections and the main slate, but we also paid close attention to newer directors too. I think nearly a third of the filmmakers are making their debut in the festival this year, some of them with their very first film. So yeah, it's a section where we can really showcase new and innovative voices wherever they might be in their artistic careers. But they're all films and filmmakers who are taking risks in their filmmaking.
Before we move ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in quickly and say, just to build on Aily's point about how the shorts were all brought together and not demarcated as narrative, documentary, experimental. That was something we wanted to achieve across the board as well. One change that we made structurally was to not have a documentary section. I'm really not a fan of thinking of documentaries as a separate other category of film. I mean, a film is a film, and I think that it is sometimes hard to even say whether a film is documentary or fiction. So I think you'll see that the main slate this year, in the absence of a documentary section, there are documentaries across the board in every single section, and the main slate has more documentaries than in decades, I would say.
I was just gonna also ask before we move on, it's interesting that Currents is sort of equivalent to projections, and that's kind of like projections is like a future-oriented name, and currents is, current. And I'm just curious how, you came up with the names, and I'm sure that relates to your philosophy of putting the section together as well.
I don't know. The names, I don't know. The names are names. I think the program speaks for itself.
There were a lot of conversations about names, weren't there, Dennis?
Yeah, there's only so many usable names. I like the idea. The current suggests a kind of fluidity, maybe a kind of that we wanted to achieve with this section. It is basically, I wouldn't say it's exactly like projections. It's sort of like a bigger tent projections, I would think. It encompasses more types, more forms of experimentation, different ideas of innovation than projections. Even though obviously it has a lot of, because Aily and I worked on projections, so in some ways it is an extension and a continuation of that, but it also folds in a lot of the work that, Tyler had been doing with the shorts programs in recent years, and also what Florence and I, think about in some of our year-round programming for new directors as well. So it is just an expansion of that. And yeah, I think Currents is a better name than projections. We'll just leave it there.
And then I guess we only have one more person to bring on before we sort of dig even deeper, and that is Dan Sullivan, who, along with Florence, co-programmed the revival section of the festival. Dan?
Yes. Hi, I'm Dan. I'm one of the programmers at Film at Lincoln Center, one of the year-round programmers, I should say. And yeah, I'm one of the two programmers of the revivals section this year. Real quick, yeah, I guess I've been around for like about a decade. I think I was an usher, and then I started programming in 2014. When Dennis came up with that silly idea. Do
you want to tell everybody how that happened?
I did not win a trivia contest, but in any event, we'll have a separate chat or separate talk during the festival about this. In any event, yeah, so I've been involved with the festival for a number of years now. I used to work on the retrospective section with Kent Jones for a bunch of years. And yeah, I think we just wanted to kind of rethink the way that we incorporate older films into the festival. I think the retrospective often, there were a lot of like incredibly worthwhile, like amazing retrospectives I saw in the context of the New York Film Festival, but I wonder if more years than not, like the retrospective could kind of get lost in the fold because everyone is excited about new work. That's kind of the whole point of our festival, at least. So, we just wanted to like rethink how older films like integrate into the rest of the festival. And and then Florence Almozini, who's one of my usual like year-round partners in crime, came on the section, and yeah, I don't know, we went ahead. But I think we wanted we wanted the revival section to be more of a companion to the rest of the festival than it's been in previous years. We wanted it to operate as like a kind of historical, like aesthetic, maybe even intellectual like supplement to a lot of the other films that you're going to see elsewhere in the lineup. And maybe we can talk about some of those films in more detail, but I also don't want to like hog the microphone when I'm at best a third, maybe a half responsible for the section. So Florence, you got anything?
It's always a joy to hear you talk, Dan. Well, one of the things we did for Revival was also, we're trying to connect with the rest of the festival. So there was one way was to talk with director in main Slate or current and ask them to pick a film to present, why that film mattered to them, and to look for something that was either restored or rare or something that would stand out in the section. But also, often in this type of classic section, the restoration is very important to maybe the depend of the actual work. So there's always a lot of restored film from the 30s and to the 50s, and there's some great work, but it doesn't always feel like very lively. It feels like something, like you could watch on TV or like quietly when you feel like it. And it was not something that really spoke to us. We really wanted to go in certain decades. So we really concentrated in the 70s, 80s, 90s, which seems maybe recent for restoration, but at the same time, why not? Because if you try to look at a print from the 80s, it's probably going to be faded, and you're going to be disappointed, and you're going to think, why did I love that movie so much? It just looks like not that great now. And just to go like the content had to matter. And also because the year has been so political, it was also important to us to look for films that would have a political content. The documentary on Muhammad Ali, the documentary on James Baldwin, among others, are really strong work that would matter any other time, but were very, very important for us this year. And we were really excited to be able to show them in the best possible way. So you can just, when you see like contemporary films, documentary, or like movie that talks about what's happening in the US today, but you can also see what was the same, like, there was some similar question in the 60s, in the 70s, and things, always hoping that will change. But then you can go full circle. And I thought that was something important to showcase in Revival this year.
Yeah, I just want to add that, that's definitely true that these, these kinds of revival sections, classic sections, and festivals can often just feel like a recapitulation of some part of like like a universally agreed upon like film canon or something. And we didn't want to do that. We want our section, or I think we did at least. If it succeeds, it'll feel a little bit like an argument maybe about the history of cinema, about how cinema relates to society and politics and sports in the case of at least one of our films. So yeah, I just think we came at it from a different angle than we have traditionally, maybe in a way that kind of is more consonant with like the work we do on our year-round program, where we definitely are thinking about these questions all the time.
Yes, that leaves us, the talks programmers, and I'll just say 3 things because you'll hear more about them soon. They are all live, they're all free, and they're all available worldwide, which should be pretty fun. And I'll let Maddie add to that.
Yeah, we've had a really good time thinking deeply about the films and all of the other sections of the festival and how they can be entered into conversation with one another, and who from this panoply of filmmakers and other creative sort of voices we would like to put into conversation with one another. And so as you'll see tomorrow when the talks lineup is announced, we've tried to bring together filmmakers and films from different sections to bring different sections into conversation with one another. We've tried to balance those kinds of reaching across the aisle with sort of deeper dives into individual films, individual filmmakers' careers, and then panels as well, sort of roundtables, more this type of a format, bringing together filmmakers from different films, along with scholars, writers, critics, other people who we feel will have something interesting to say, some interesting perspective and insight to add to sort of enrich the conversation around these films. And so we're really excited to share all of that, and definitely tune in from wherever you are in the world. These will be happening at different times day throughout the festival. So hopefully you'll be able to join us.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, the whole the festival as a whole is really topical. You know, there's no other way to say it. I hate using that word, but really this is like a very timely lineup in terms of the films, in terms of the way they're being presented. And so we're hoping that talks will be that sidebar where I think a lot of the themes that the programmers have had sort of bubbling underneath have been implying through their selections. We're going to try and really create a space to talk about them and talk about issues of politics, be it protest or sustainability, and other things that we've just been talking about in culture, because all the films really do relate to those issues in very engaged ways. So we're excited about that.
So I think now that we've introduced everybody and sort of laid out the map of the festival, we will ask Dan and Rachel to hop back on. I see they've turned their cameras off. And we will sort of get a conversation going with the group. I'm interested in any highlights that any of you would like to share from your sections, things that may have sort of gone overlooked or been under discussed in sort of the anticipation of the festival that you want to highlight to encourage people to not miss.
We'll start with the main slate maybe, and just to add to that, I'm especially curious because you've mentioned how this year's main slate has like discoveries alongside some of the biggest names, and maybe like even the discoveries or the kind of newer rising filmmakers seem to have more space than in previous years. So maybe you can talk about that mix.
Should I start?
Go ahead,
please.
I don't want to be like Dan and just hog the microphone.
You'd never.
I know that we will certainly talk about opening night and the 3 films by Steve McQueen. So maybe I will, instead of starting with Beigh, I would maybe start with Discovery and maybe the newer name that came in the festival. It's true because we work on new director, new film, we're always on the lookout for new talents, like the cinema of today, the cinema of tomorrow, wherever it's like one film or one director. And it was really interesting to work in that concept a little bit deeper and not to rely just on the same, like 10, 15 very familiar names that would pop up at the New York Film Festival every year. So some of the discovery would be often in like world cinema. One of my personal favorites is Disciple, a film from India by Chaitanya Tamane. He made Court a few years ago, and it's a really beautiful exploration from a young musician's search for perfection and disappointment in life. It has its own rhythm. I think it's a marvelous film, and I hope people will take a chance of a movie from India. It's been quite a while since he had one in main slate, so it was kind of exciting. Beginning, it's a film from Georgia. It might be. I think it's the first film from Georgia in main slate ever in the festival. So really a year experiment. From a young filmmaker called Dea Gulumbegashvili. She had a short in New Director a few years ago. It's a very striking and very strong, disturbing movie about following a religious family that are like harassed by the police and by their neighbors and all things that could come to them. But it's extremely well shot. It's strikingly beautifully to look at and very disturbing when you look at the content. But it's a very interesting filmmaker that I think we want to see more from. I love Tragic Jungle. It's a movie from Mexico by also she's made 3 or 4 films, Yulene Olaizola. Before, I think it's the first time she's in the festival. It's a sort of drama in the jungle where you don't really know if myths and reality gets mixed up. It's also very beautifully filmed with beautiful work of with the cinematographer. It's disturbing. It talks about opposition with men and nature, white men and colonialist background too. It's a very interesting film. So just a few that I think I wanted to talk about.
I'm going to throw in one. You know, I was looking. Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel.
No, go ahead.
I'll throw in one and then throw to Rachel. I was just looking at the list of films that are playing in the first few days, and I should have paired that up next to a list of films that also have tickets available. So I'm not necessarily sure if I'm mentioning a film that still has space, but I hope it does. I was really taken with a film in the main slate called The Calming, and it's just such a, I don't know if folks know the work of Song Fang and saw Memories Look at Me, which was in the festival a few years ago. But there was something just totally kind of mesmerizing for me about this film in its quietness. It's the story of a woman, a young woman who's kind of navigating some relationships in her life and the relationships with her own family and kind of reflecting on some aspects of her own life. But there's something about the way that the film, I think it was about the timing in which we saw it, Dennis and Rachel and Flo, I think the word tranquility is used in the description, and it's such and the title of the film is The Calming. I think there was something just so nourishing and meaningful about kind of the observant nature of this movie that actually brought a sense of calm amidst a summer of so much stress, anxiety, and conversation, deep conversation about so much. This film invites kind of a pause and an observation that I think was really inviting, enticing, and also very rewarding for me. So it's a film that's playing very soon on the schedule, and that's why I chose sort of this one to highlight. It's playing in the virtual cinema starting on the 19th for 5 days. So I hope you'll just seek this one out, The Calming, and give it a look.
I was just gonna sort of talk a little bit more about the nonfiction films in the main slate, but and I want to echo Dennis that I was so excited that they were part of it, because I mean, you can look at a film like I Carry You With Me, which is very much a hybrid that has narrative and nonfiction, or even the centerpiece film Nomadland, which traditionally would probably be defined as a fiction film, but has so much natural observation in it that it's hard to draw a distinction anyway. But even within the more traditional nonfiction films in the festival, there's such a beautiful wide range, both in terms of style and just in terms of experience versus discovery that we're talking about. So, you know, it's no surprise to see Frederick Wiseman's latest film, and, you know, it will not disappoint you to spend quality time observing like the political process on a very specific level in Boston. Same goes for Sam Pollard's really wonderful MLK FBI documentary that you know, takes a subject that's been dealt with in nonfiction films before and really goes deeper, not only in terms of presenting information that hasn't been seen or heard before, but also just talking about that very information and how it's going to be used historically and filmically. Right through, I won't talk about every single one of them, right through some like wonderful mid-career documentaries like Notturno and Gunda and Swimming Out Till the Sea Turns Blue, which is a wonderful documentary by a filmmaker whose narrative work has been shown quite often in the New York Film Festival. But to me, the real discoveries are the first and second time documentary filmmakers whose films absolutely deserve to be in the main slate along with these masters. The Truffle Hunters, which is a wonderful prismatic look at a culture that is swiftly changing and fading away. But the film that really impresses me so much is Garrett Bradley's Time. This is such a beautiful documentary, and there's so much to say about it in terms of the really important and timely issues that it's discussing. But what's really beautiful about it is this exploration of family, of faith. It's really a dialogue between Garrett Bradley and the film's participants, both cinematically, and because the main participant in the film shot so much of the footage, and the way that footage is integrated with the new footage is really beautiful, but just also in terms of how it expresses these really important issues by showing the impact on the really small, mundane elements of our lives. You know, usually films that deal with issues tend to hit on like big crisis points. And this film really makes a deeper, I think, argument by looking at the minutia of a life and the love between this family.
I'm just gonna, I think, make one point because most of many of my favorites have already been mentioned, but I just wanted to say that one thing that we did explicitly talk about, the four of us and Cam, is this idea of maybe not having a preconceived idea of what a main slate film is. And that was actually made for some interesting conversations. It was like, why does a main slate film have to be a film of a certain quote unquote size or by an auteur of a certain stature? You know, of course, there are going to be, you know, familiar faces and regular names. If Hong Sang-soo and Christian Petzold keep making great films, we're going to keep showing them. But it should not seem like a parade of like usual suspects every time you look at a festival lineup, especially for a 58-year-old festival. So, and we were also quite mindful about wanting to correct some blind spots. Like, it's insane to me that India hasn't had a film in the main slate in nearly a quarter century, and that Georgia, with its rich cinematic history, has apparently never had a film in the festival, I found out today, which is also, you know, a big oversight. So so those things, you know, definitely factored into our discussions and factored into the process of looking for these films. We were definitely surprised in the process of programming, and I think that's always a good thing. And I hope that that translates to the people who are writing about the festival, the people who are watching the films as well.
I want to kind of switch over to currents now, and you know, something that I've been kind of catching up on the current selections, and I've been struck by is, you know, the words like experimental and avant-garde and all of that are sort of thrown around, and people attach certain ideas to them. But the current section is so eclectic, but it's also like, it's so funny. Like someone said it earlier, it's like one of the funniest sections in the festival, like full of really playful experiments with narrative and form. And can you kind of talk about, you know, how it ended up in with this particular kind of tone? And
yeah, I agree. I think Currents is where all the comedies are. But, I do think these are some of the wittiest films in the festival, and I could name any number of them. Nico Pereira's new film, Fauna, I think is one of his, he's such a smart filmmaker, and I think this is one of his smartest and funniest films. I want to also mention this wonderful essay film by the Argentinian director Nicholas Zuckerfeld. We showed a short of his a few years ago, and this is the wonderfully titled "There Are Not 36 Ways of Showing a Man Getting on a Horse." I think I got that right. Which is a sort of found footage film, and then an essay film. I won't say more than that. And I really want to single out the two films by Heinz Emmigholz in the section, which are, to me, just completely like one of a kind. Heinz has been working for decades in many modes, just redefining, what an film about architecture can be. And in this recent cycle of films, I think he's just completely liberated and making films that are in some ways about the biggest questions imaginable, but also have a completely wild and idiosyncratic sense of humor. They're unlike anything else. But yeah, I don't know that we even really consciously thought about that as we were putting the lineup together. I know that all of us, I think, did respond to those films for that reason, because of how humor was one big part of it. But yeah, as I go back, and sometimes you get lost in the process a little bit when you're in the middle of programming, and then only after you pull back and look at the lineup as a whole, you're struck by certain currents, certain things running through it, and certain certain. I like that you call it eclectic, because for me this is a wonderfully eclectic group of films. But I'll let the others jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to shout out another comedy that's on my mind, because I just recorded a Q&A with the directors, which is just one of the many stranger elements about the festival this year. But I'll shout out Slow Machine by Paul Felton and Joe DiNardo, which is a very independent New York made, I guess you can call it a comedy thriller. It's ostensibly about an actress who gets involved with an NYPD intelligence officer in the sort of the downtown scene of Manhattan. But I don't know, I think its sense of humor and its very peculiar atmosphere and the really amazing performances by Stephanie Hayes and Scott Shepherd, I think really shine in the ways they all sort of resist sort of the way we bring our own expectations to genre films and certain kinds of performances. It's just a very funny, strange, thought-provoking idea of a very particular New York milieu that I definitely encourage people to check out, either online or I think it's screening at our Brooklyn Drive-In. Oh wait, I should also, it's also screening with a short film by Mark Jenkin called Hard Crack the Wind. Mark Jenkin was in New Directors, I think, a year ago with his feature film Beigh. And this film is a different kind of spin on a genre film that kind of aligns with Slow Machine. This film is more or less a kind of ghost story set in Cornwall, and I expect you'll see other connections that emerge between that and Slow Machine as you finish the program. But yeah, it's a really fun pairing of films.
I want to highlight our opening night film, The Inheritance by Ephraim Masili, who is a filmmaker we've been showing for years in projections. We've been showing his short films, and it's very exciting. This is his debut feature, and it really incorporates a lot of the kind of observational documentary style that he had been developing over many years in his shorter form work. And he's really brought elements of that into the feature, but also really expanded his formal approach by writing a script, working with actors, and, you know, really kind of housing some of that documentary material within a narrative. And the film is about a group of young Black artists and activists who live collectively in a house in Philadelphia, and is also thinking a lot about the history of the Black arts movement, and brings in legendary figures from the Move group, as well as poets like Sonia Sanchez. And it's also really quite funny and enjoyable, and it is opening our section on Friday at the drive-in, and I believe there are still more tickets for that. So really recommend you come out to see it in your car. And if you can't, we'll be showing it also virtually as well, of course. And I also really want to encourage people who haven't watched many shorts in the festival to explore our shorts programs. We have 8 programs. A lot of, if you follow projections or the main Slate shorts in the past, you'll see some alumni, you know, some figures from Ben Rivers, Sylvia Schittelbauer, Kevin Jerome Everson, Ricky Jamrose, many familiar names, but as Tyler said, a lot of new names, and a lot of younger filmmakers making really exciting work. So yeah, please explore the short section.
I agree on what you just said about The Inheritance, which is a really wonderful film. Everybody loved it on the committee right away. But in addition to all the meaning of the film and the historical and political context, it's also a movie that really shows love for cinema in so many different ways, and that's also why it works so well. You can tell that he has so many influences that created a new style, a new genre, a new voice, and it's impossible not to fall for a movie that just works so well and mix every angle of art together. So it's a really, really great film, and I would love to see it on the big screen with everyone. One other film I really liked is John Vito, Socialist Smile. It's a very unusual documentary on sort of a secret life of Helen Keller, who was a very dedicated progressist activist working for liberals' rights and women's rights, which it's not something that's well known. The movie is really beautifully made when you explore her voice and the way what you would say our text was transcribed on screen in so many different ways. But it's also a movie that has also a lot of humor in it, even so you would not think that you could have a laugh about Helen Keller. But she was a very funny woman too. And one quote that stayed with me from the film is about what did Congress do for you lately? And it's nothing. And it's just like, well, it's been 100 years of Congress, been difficult. So it has a lot of humor also, but it's a really beautiful documentary. So I hope people will want to explore this secret life of Helen Keller.
Well, I'm looking at the clock and being conscious of time, and I know we don't want to keep people too long, but we do want to leave some time to let the programmers answer some of the questions that have come in from the audience, which we appreciate you submitting. So I guess, Devika, do you want to take turns sort of shuttling some questions from the audience to the programmer?
Sure, let's hear a little about some of the revivals selections first, and then maybe we go into the questions. So maybe Dan and Florence. Sorry,
Yeah, nice
there's
try,
not a
Maddie.
ton of time, but it's sort of a shorter section, so I feel okay in giving you a little less time.
I'll talk very quickly.
It's well represented in talks. I will give that as a hint. So I feel like there's going to be people will have lots of opportunities to discover this amazing section. But maybe tell us a little bit about your picks.
Sure. Florence, I'll make with three rapid fire recommendations, and you can take it from there. All right. First, I'm gonna recommend a film that's not in our section, but is very kindred. Is actually in currents, but maybe under different circumstances could have been in revivals. I don't want anyone to sleep on The Tango of the Widower and Its Distorting Mirror, the latest dispatch from Raul Ruiz from Beyond the Grave. Long live Raul Ruiz. I think check this film out. Even if you know his work, you're perhaps not expecting this. It really, truly is something. And I'm not just saying that because of the novelty of it being his third or fourth posthumous film, I forget. Okay, so then I'm going to say that typically with our section, we don't really have the luxury of discovery by virtue of what it is. But this year we at least have a pretty solid rediscovery, I think, which is the Iranian film The Chess Game of the Wind, 1976, screened publicly just once before it was banned following the revolution in 1979. Totally astonishing film, a debut feature by Mohammad Reza Aslani. For fans of sumptuous, like poetic, refined period films, you can't really do much better than this film. It's exquisitely shot, incredible score. And yeah, we're very happy to be spotlighting this too little known masterwork of Iranian cinema, and hopefully it'll have a whole life now. And I should also, I just also want to add fans of, Visconti or maybe like the Kubrick of Barry Lyndon or something should definitely tune in. There will be something there for you. And then I'll recommend one film of ours, or one and a half, that's playing in the drive-in, Muhammad Ali the Greatest by the similarly great, sorry, there was a motorcycle passing by. The similarly great photographer and filmmaker William Klein. In my mind, this is like nothing short of one of the great sports documentaries, but also one of the great political documentaries. It is a film that I think miraculously manages to attend to nearly everything that Muhammad Ali represented, and that is a really tall order. But trust me, watch the film. I think you'll agree. And we're showing that in the drive-in along with Meeting the Man, James Baldwin in Paris, which was directed by Terrence Dixon, shot by Jack Kazan, who you might know is the director of films like A Bigger Splash. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there and see if Florence thinks I missed anything.
Oh, wait. I was on mute. Oh, I hope I didn't laugh too much. Well, you did miss some. I'm surprised you did not mention Flowers of Shanghai by Wu Shachen. But it's one of my favorite films of all time, so I was really excited that it's been restored by Janusz Criterion. In the Mood for Love, which we've been talking about with Wong Kar-wai retrospective that's finally coming up in December, if all goes well. Damnation, Lachar, also an amazing restoration. You can't go wrong with that. And maybe one film that's not in revival, even though I wanted it in revival, but apparently I could not have it in revival. It's really incredible film. Well, now I'm blanking on the name. That's really amazing.
Upper Wells.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's not in revival because it's not an old film.
Well, it's not an old film, but yes, it's
Depends on how.
But I don't know. We had discussion about that. It's definitely not to be missed. It's 2 hours of conversation with Orson and Dennis Hopper, and it's just incredible. So it works in every section. So.
And you get a rare opportunity to see it at the drive-in this Friday as well.
Yeah, in Queens, right?
And please don't be misled by the fact that both my co-programmer and I recommended films from other sections when talking about our own section. I think we both perhaps wrongly think that a lot of these films are like so undeniable that they speak for themselves, and perhaps we're wrong in this. But I think if you watch all of the films in revivals perhaps you'll agree that these films speak for themselves and they're incredible. So thanks.
Yes.
All right. I think we'll go into audience Q&As now. Some audience members have been sending in questions. Sorry, we're keeping everyone, including panelists and everyone who's watching, a little late, but that's what happens when you have a great program and endless number of films to talk about. So, Maddie, do you want to start shooting some questions? And whoever unmutes themselves first will answer. That's the rule now.
Sure. I see that we've got a couple of questions along similar lines that I'll sort of hybridize. Several people in the audience were interested in the number of films that were programmed and whether there were challenges inherent in coming to that number as a result of the pandemic and changing release schedules. And I'm just wondering if there were sort of how the actual contours of the program were affected by the moment.
There was some impact, but I wouldn't say it was enormous. A few films that we looked at fairly early in the process actually told us that they were going to hold for next year, which a lot of films have done, and wait to premiere in a hopefully post-pandemic world. And other than that, yeah, a few release schedules did move a little bit, which affected the availability of a couple of films. But that happens every year, to be honest. And I feel like programming, there's just so much of just navigating those kinds of concerns. It's not like programmers have access to it's not like every film that's been made up to that point is available to you. There's just so many realities to navigate. It's not like ordering off a menu. So we do that every year. It just didn't feel there's a little bit more of it than usual, but similar to how we would navigate that question. In terms of the size of the program, number of films, the intention was to scale it down a little bit. So I would say this year's program is maybe 25% smaller than last year's, and we were sort of hoping for it to be about maybe 10 to 15% smaller. So the idea was always to make a tighter festival. But there was no shortage of submissions for short films, as Tyler and Aily can attest. And there were plenty of films that we found worthy of discussion, and we could have shown even more. Eugene or anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I could say something about availability of films for revivals, because it's such a different thing, right? A lot of there was no one working in a lot of the archives for much of this year, and I think that set back the restoration and film preservation calendar. Not like myself being totally in that world. I couldn't say with any kind of specificity how far it pushed things back, but yeah, I think there were some things we were counting on for this year that won't be done until next year because people couldn't get into the labs and so on. But besides that, I think just the upheaval and the stress and angst and inspiration and everything that's gone up into this moment is actually one of the more kind of generative things to respond to that I've encountered since I've been film programming. So it's almost there were challenges, but it felt right and it felt productive to kind of respond to those.
Devika, do you want to pick the next one? I think you may be muted.
Yep. There's a really interesting question about the increased accessibility of films via the virtual screenings. Someone says, this is Lily Haynes, my sister who doesn't really follow film wants to sit down and watch 3 of my screenings with me, which is rather lovely. So could you kind of chime in on, yeah, just how you're feeling about the fact that the festival is nationwide in a sense, and maybe you could also tell us some films that you're excited about the drive-in screening, especially because that's also not exactly the theatrical format.
One thing I'll start with, and others can jump in, to the second part of your question, is the process of putting the festival together, starting with the conversations we were having back in March and April. The process evolved in ways that we really couldn't predict, I think, because there was a time, there was a time early in the spring when we just assumed that we'd be back in our theaters by the time the festival rolled around. But also, I think that the virtual platform that we've launched is new, and we didn't know for sure that any number of the films that we've invited to the festival would be willing to participate in on the platform. That was something we didn't sort of plan for or expect in the kind of richness that we're able to offer on the virtual platform. As it turns out, it was like such an amazing confluence of, you know, putting this platform together, where we've been working behind the scenes with folks at Sundance and Toronto, and working on a similar platform, and just trying to get a system in place that would meet the expectations of both distributors and filmmakers in terms of quality, in terms of piracy, security issues, all that kind of stuff. And actually, it turned out that all of that came together. We had to put this platform together, and then, you know, I think 99% of the films at the festival are actually available. There's been a whole, you know, negotiation process, for another conversation, another day, just a negotiation with distributors on, you know, the number of streams and the window of time that films would be available. So if there's a film that still has streams available and you're interested, please jump on that quickly, because there's a limited number. But it's something that I don't think we couldn't have imagined or predicted, that the festival would have such a rich array of films available to it on the platform, and that the platform would be available nationwide. I think that's something that's really significant, and we're starting to hear about that. I'm starting to hear about that from folks, and we're hearing about it from folks who are outside of the typical audience of the New York Film Festival, being able to tune in and to check out films, you know, really for the first time. So that it's a transformative aspect of the festival that I think will probably have longer term ramifications once we sort of get our heads around, you know, and get beyond the current moment.
I guess, am I happy about the accessibility that, you know, virtual screenings provide? Yes, but am I happy that we're not in cinemas? No. I mean, you know, that's not ideal. That's not what any of us want. I think all the filmmakers made these films with the cinema in mind, and we were aware of that. But we do think that there is an upside to, you know, these measures that we've devised. I mean, if cinemas are inaccessible, we do have drive-ins. That's the only way we could do it legally and safely in New York City at this point. And I am actually, yes, very, very happy that people who don't live in New York can watch, you know, almost every single film. I think all but 2 feature films and every single short film will be available on the platform. And your question, Devika, about watching films about drive-in, I haven't seen a film on a big screen since early March, so I can't wait. I'm really excited to see Steve McQueen's Lovers Rock on opening night on a big screen with people, and I'm also excited to see films that would never ever have a drive-in screening, really, under any other circumstance, like, you know, Matias Pinheiro's Isabella. I'm very excited to see that. Simon Liang's Days. I also recorded a Q&A with him, and I asked him, because he's been showing in so many different forms over the years, like galleries, and I was like, have you ever shown a drive-in? He was like, no. So this will be Simon Liang's first drive-in screening with one of his very best films. So I'm excited about that too.
Anyone else have any quick drive-in picks?
I've never been to a drive-in movie actually, so I couldn't say, you know, like what would be the best fit without like really understanding the phenomenology of it. So I'm going to find out, you know,
That's actually a
in a
fun
few
thing.
days.
I mean, a lot of people in New York will be discovering drive-in screenings through this time. So that's fun. Do we have room? Shall we squeeze in just one last question before we close out, Maddie? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Do you have one queued up, or shall I choose one?
Just go ahead.
I see a couple of questions that are asking about process. One that I find interesting is the question of selecting shorts to screen with features and what sort of goes into that process. I think there's an intuitive element to that process that might be hard to articulate, but I'm interested in, and I think we can expand that to also the question of programming shorts programs and any kind of occasion that we have to bring films together to screen as sort of a package.
I guess to touch on the first part of that question, as far as figuring out what short to pair with a feature, I mean, Aily, correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like we had these, you know, 3 or 4 shorts that one of us maybe really liked as we were sort of reviewing submissions that we weren't quite sure would fit or make sense in a program. And I don't know, we maybe just hung on to these films, and just as we were figuring out final deliberations with the features, I don't know, a lot of these pairings sort of just came up pretty naturally. And the fits just, I don't know, made sense as we were discussing our final picks over Zoom. Yeah. As for the other programs, it involved digging into a combination of solicited and open submissions. As Dennis alluded to earlier, we had over 1,500 films to work through, and we had obviously the opportunity to work with you, Maddie, Shelby Shaw, and a few other submissions assistants who helped us enormously review films along with our pre-screeners. But I mean, unlike the features, most of the submissions we review have always been on our laptops, and so in many ways it was business as usual, except all our sort of conversations were done over Zoom, which I don't know, in many ways was more regular than ever before in previous years. So it just felt like a very natural and ongoing dialogue throughout the summer that made thinking about and selecting the films really easy as I spoke to everyone that's in this Zoom room.
Well, I think seeing as we are in a Zoom call that's sort of replicating the process that Tyler's talking about, this seems like a nice moment to draw the curtains on this chat. What do you think, Devika?
I think unfortunately things have to end even when they're on Zoom. So yeah, that sounds good. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but like we said, lots of talks coming, you know, consistently throughout the festival, all online and live. So you're really going to have a great opportunity to send questions, not just to us, but other filmmakers in the program, other really cool people. So just keep tuning in. I also want to give a shout out to, you know, there's so many people at Film at Lincoln Center who are not here who like make the festival happen. So just a shout out to all our colleagues working behind the scenes, especially Jordan Roth, our digital marketing manager, who has been feeding you information and producing this talk. So thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
And yeah, Maddie, do you have any last words for the crowd before?
Just that I'm excited to connect with people, mostly virtually. I don't have a car, but maybe a few in person hellos. But a virtual festival is still a festival, and I'm really thrilled that we are going ahead with it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, our panelists. Everyone's been working super hard. Can't wait for Thursday, and you know, looking forward to seeing everyone again very soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank both of you, and thank all of you.
Thank you all.